Welcome to the Tuesday night live stream. I've got some stuff on my mind that I want to talk about, and it has to do with some kind of deep thoughts regarding living in Portland, Oregon. And what a better way to do it than on the channel that we're doing all things Portland life. So I was watching the news this week and I saw in the Midwest, specifically like Oklahoma this past week, out of nowhere, tornadoes are ripping through towns, crashing over, houses, people showing back up a day or two later, and there's literally nothing left. Like houses are flattened, schools are flattened, grocery stores are, sideways. And it's just, I thought, wow, like people live in those areas knowing that at any given moment, a tornado can come ripping through the area and literally take out the house, or they have to get into a bunker or a shelter. And I thought, as a Portland, Oregon, as an Oregonian, I don't have to worry about tornadoes. I never have to worry about tornadoes. Um, Same with, Florida. When Florida went through all those crazy hurricanes a few years ago, especially on the coastline where people get really affected. I was like, man, I don't have to worry about some crazy hurricane ripping through Portland, Oregon in any given season and causing total chaos. I mean, there were parts of the Florida coast that literally got, completely demolished. And even worse is with all of this natural disaster stuff that happens, and we're seeing it right now, is horrible situations going on with insurance. It's happening in California, it's happening in Florida, it's happening all over the place, specifically in those areas of the country where natural disasters just exist, and it's part of what they have to account for when you're buying a house. It's like, yeah, you need all kinds of extra insurance in order to cover your butt if the house gets, hit by a hurricane or flooded in some hurricane or tornado or what have you. And I always thought that growing up, like I remember thinking like, wow, hurricanes and tornadoes sound like the scariest thing ever. Like who lives there? And I would ask my parents, like, why would anybody choose to live in an area where like something can come ripping through every year and you're just keeping your fingers and toes crossed that, nothing's going to flatten your house. But people live in those areas. Okay. That's the risk they take. But in Portland, we don't have that. I think the biggest natural disasters we face um, is we do get sometimes a windstorm that comes through. I think we had, a pretty couple of storms in the last 3 years where the wind or the ice wind, not a good combination, right? It tends to take out a lot of trees. We see a lot of trees coming down all over Portland. It becomes a mess. Power goes out. We do see occasionally somebody's house get hit by a tree, but for the most part, it's pretty rare, pretty infrequent, and it's not enough damage to really call it a huge natural disaster. It doesn't shut down our entire town for, you know, usually more than a week at best. And usually it's case by case and individuals, somebody's house got a tree on it. So, when I think about the Portland area being, you know, really not having to worry about a lot of these big natural disasters, earthquakes, of course, everybody's always talking about the big one coming. They've talked about that since I was a kid. I'm, born and raised here, and that's all anybody ever talked about. We did actually have an earthquake in like 1994, I want to say it was. I got shooken up out of bed. Wasn't too big of a deal. Yeah, sure, we're on a fault line, and there's always predictions about that. But there was also an earthquake in New York a few weeks ago, and nobody predicted any earthquakes happening in New York. Um, but yeah, you look at California, and there's definitely been some big earthquakes that have happened down there. They also have a lot of fires, and we do get a lot of Californians that are just really, really tired of the fires that come every single summer, it seems like now. And especially there was one year where we had a ton of Californians come up that it was like one of their worst fire years yet. And it was really staggering to see, you know, the population that just came out of California up to Oregon because they were just done with fires. Fires happen all the time down there. So, and their insurance rates are going through the roof. So we oftentimes see that insurance is one of those things where, they're pulling out of states. Like California has a few insurance companies pulling out, Florida. I have a client right now who bought a condo on the coast in Florida a few years ago, and it got completely demolished during that. I think it was Hurricane Ian. That was the last big gnarly hurricane. and they just went down there actually to check on the status of the rebuild. They just got going in the rebuild. The insurance companies were not actually paying out for like a long time after their condos got demolished. And now they said when they rebuild, like the whole HOA, everybody in that HOA had to pony up the money, pool the money together, and rebuild, okay, before the insurance even paid out. So now insurance is just starting to like start paying out. But they said when they get the thing rebuilt and they have insurance on it, it is going to be 10 times what it was before. Before. And they said it's almost not worth it to rebuild it and do it. But what else choice do they have? Like they just leave the grounds, they would lose their, they would lose, everything altogether. So literally luckily the HOA, the people that bought in there have some money. They've all pulled together, they're rebuilding ahead of insurance helping them. But now the insurance on the property is going to be so outlandish that it is going to be prohibitive to even buy into that. And that's all because they're on the coast, in a really beautiful area of Florida. But their comment was, gosh, we bought that place as a second home. Wish we'd never done it. And they're like, living in the Pacific Northwest, we never have these kind of natural disasters. We never have to worry about a hurricane come sweeping in and like knocking everything out. But I will say the insurance is changing on a lot of condominiums, especially if you're on water. And I can say that because my dad lives in a condo over the river in the Vancouver area. And check this out, their insurance on that condo used to be um, $80,000. Was it $80,000 a year? It was quite high, and now it's like $400,000 a year in just 1 year. And that's just because they're on water. And of course, all the insurance companies out there are changing the game when it comes to what they're going to be charging for insurance, especially if you're on water, because now they consider you high risk, even though we're not technically in areas where we get hit by, tornadoes and, hurricanes. But still, I think these insurance companies are really getting freaked out in general. And they're just basically saying, we're going to start charging more because we don't want to carry the risk anymore of that happening. Not to mention some of the condominium buildings in Florida were also going under a big scrutiny with the way that they were having to have professionals come out and look at the actual structure of the complexes to make sure that they were sound. Because if you remember a few years ago, there was a huge condo complex that literally collapsed and killed dozens and dozens of people because they had serious problems with their infrastructure that pretty much the HOA ignored and caused total casualties, right? So then that started a whole process where insurance companies were like, now you need to have your whole structure completely reviewed, which they should, right? I mean, makes a lot of sense. But with that, HOAs got real spooked with anything to do with condos. So something to keep in mind. So as I'm kind of mentioning, as I decided to do this live tonight, I wanted to talk about the fact that in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have crazy insurance things happening as like we're seeing in other parts of the country where they're either pulling out altogether and you have to go find insurance and it's next to impossible, or you're having to pay through the nose, which it almost doesn't make it economical to even buy in those areas. And a colleague of mine who lives in Florida said it's really going to be tough to sell property like condominiums. So it just got me thinking about Portland, as I was watching the news this week and watching everything, tear through, the Midwest with their tornadoes. I thought, man, it's so nice that we don't have to like worry about those seasons like so many of the other parts of the country where it's like, oh, it's hurricane season, it's tornado season, that sort of thing. The other thing I think that's really nice about Oregon is like we don't get humidity the way that the rest of the country sees humidity. And I didn't know what humidity was like until I showed up in Florida in August. That was next level. And I got smacked in the face with humidity the first time I ever went to Florida. Yeah, August probably wasn't the right time of the year to go. But man, you get into the shower and you get out of the shower and you realize like there's no difference. You don't feel like you've gotten a bath or a shower or clean or nothing. But there's lots of parts of the country that get just tremendous humidity um, half the year. I have, like I said, I have Florida family, and sometimes I go visit them even on off, non-summer months, and it is humid. And if you're not into heat like that, I mean, I don't know that I could live in that kind of humidity. It's pretty intense. I like dry heat. So when I go down to Arizona, I don't mind that heat. That's actually doable for me. But I have been to Arizona when it's 122 degrees and you can't leave your house. You can't do anything. I remember sitting there watching the news and they were talking about how like 20 people died going outside that day. They were hiking, they were overexerting themselves. And I thought, wow, okay, well, we don't have to worry about that too much. We don't get that hot of summers, although we have seen hot summers. 2 years ago, we had a really weird run of about 110, 115-degree weather, and I was like, "Portland doesn't get that." I mean, it's really rare we get, that kinda heat, and that was hot. That was hot. We had a siding in some cases melt like that, vinyl siding that you see on some houses, that plasticky looking. People had all kinds of issues with, when it got that hot here in Portland. That was kinda interesting, but we don't get that hot. So luckily, it was just like a moment in time, kind of a blip in the whole season. But in general, we're pretty temperate. I mean, yes, it sucks sometimes to have weeks and months on end of just rain and gray. If you can handle that, when you look at the bigger picture of the rest of the country, we don't have these extreme seasons where you have to worry about like huge natural disasters coming in and like obliterating cities and towns and buildings and whatnot. So if you can think of a natural disaster that I'm not thinking about here in Portland, I mean, we had the fire scare here a few years ago. I remember in 2020, it didn't come into the Portland metro, but it got pretty close. We had some fires happening. That was a pretty bad fire year all around, even all up and down the West Coast. If you remember, there was like Canada and of course, California, and I think Colorado had some as well. But yeah, we do get fires. Like if you go to Bend, Oregon, there is always a fire season now. It's like the last 5 years in a row straight have been fire seasons. I used to go down there religiously in August every summer, and it would be, smoky skies. It actually kind of stunk because I like to go out and do outdoor things, kayak and hike and all that stuff. And it just doesn't make it any fun when you're smelling, smoke and fire and, the doesn't look so nice outside. So that is kind of the kicker with Oregon, I guess, Central Oregon, if you're kind of, go down there and spend your time, which I do like to go down there in the summertime and spend my time. There's nothing more beautiful than Southern Oregon. Oh, it's magic. Um, but yeah, that's kind of stinky about Bend, but we don't really have a fire season around here too much. That was kind of a fluke storm wind. I remember the day it all happened actually. And it was quiet and a beautiful sunny day. And we got warnings that there was going to be a massive windstorm. Well, it all kind of started, out in the, further counties and it was a mess. But in general, we don't really have like seasons every year where it's like we have to worry about fire in the Portland metro area where the bulk of our population is. Suppose if you're further out, that's a little bit more of a concern, but yeah. And then the other thing I thought was interesting about, as I'm pondering, living in Portland this evening is, a lot of people don't really talk about the urban growth boundary. The urban growth boundary is like this imaginary line that goes all the way around the Portland metro area. And they came up with it decades ago, and they basically were like, "We don't want it. We don't want urban sprawl." Like if you go to Texas right now, you go to Arizona, you go to Nevada, some of these states where they have a lot of land, a lot of population, they just build. They just grab land, build, and they build subdivision after subdivision. In fact, one of my clients just got back from Texas because they're moving there, and they said it's just like subdivision after subdivision. I mean, it's just like an oasis of subdivisions, housing, building as far as the eye can see, tons of new construction. And they can do that for, probably years because they have so much land. But of course, they talked about how that their commute was going to be almost an hour to the subdivision they were looking at buying in to where they actually were going to be working. So, you push out the population and the subdivisions when you do that. But here in Portland, smartly, rightly or wrongly, I guess, decades ago, they decided, hey, let's do an urban growth boundary where like you can't build outside of this urban growth boundary. And if you do, it gets voted in and then annexed in. So what happens is right now we have an urban growth boundary, obviously, and you can almost see it when you go out to look at some of the like where the country meets the city kind of thing, or where urban meets the city, or sorry, country meets urban. Specifically, let's say right now out here in the Beaverton area where there's an urban growth line, you can literally see farmlands. It still looks like farmlands, but right up against it is new construction. Well, that land was voted in years ago. We're talking probably 8 years ago. And then it has to annex in, and then the developers can start building. So We do vote on the land being entered into the urban growth boundary, and it's always coveted land. If you own land right outside the urban growth boundary, most of those people hold on to their properties because they're worth a lot at the point at which a builder or developer steps forward and says, "Hey, I'll pay you $6 million for your 18 acres," or whatever it is. But they have to vote that land in, and then they have to annex it in, and then they have to develop it. And most people don't realize that whole process can take 10, 12, 14 years. So most of this land was bought probably in the last decade, maybe even before that, because it takes so long to get it all going. And so it's not like they just go out and buy the land and put all the houses up. It has to be it's a process. So we don't build enough and we don't build fast enough here in Portland. And for the amount of growth that Portland is still seeing on a yearly basis, and all the projections that they're telling us through the economic forecast that they do, we are way behind in having new construction. But what the urban growth boundary has done for Portland, which is smart, is number one, it hasn't allowed us to just push out and go build on, endless land and go all the way to the coast. I suppose they could if we didn't have an urban growth boundary. It protects the inner part of our city. So houses inside of the urban growth boundary, land inside of the urban growth boundary tends to be way more valuable, keeps our prices steady. So when the rest of the world, like right now, Phoenix, Arizona, they're going through a bit of a housing recession where there's a lot of inventory, there's a ton of new construction. Houses are sitting for a really long time. And in a lot of cases, when you get that urban sprawl and you develop during the high times, the low interest rates, or when the demand is high, all of a sudden when the market switches, you end up with way more houses than you do demand. And all of a sudden you find housing prices compress, they come down. They don't necessarily crash, but you start to see that the further out you are, which is what happens in urban sprawl, is those houses become less valuable and less attractive and harder to resale than the houses closer into where maybe city, industry, commerce exists. And so Portland, in their smart way, was like, we're going to preserve all that. Now, the downfall of that is, number one, you don't have enough housing, which is what I've covered. But the other part of it is a lot of times we are not prepared for the traffic problems that exist in Portland, right? So if you know Portland, if you've been here, if you live here, you know how difficult it is sometimes just to go a few miles. I mean, doesn't matter anymore if you're going from east to west or west to east. Traffic patterns are real here. And even on the weekends, I mean, my God, this weekend I was going up to Vancouver, Washington to visit family, and I was on I-5, which is a fast moving, freeway, main freeway here that runs through downtown Portland and then shoots up north all the way up to Seattle, really. And it was like standstill traffic. And I was like, there was no traffic accidents or anything. I couldn't figure out where the traffic was coming from. And sometimes that's what it is. It's like just a lot of people on the roads. And, it's, it happens on the weekends almost as much as it happens during the weekday. And sometimes I would even say more so because I think more people are out and about. But yeah, traffic is real. And so that urban growth boundary, like it doesn't always, it didn't account for the amount of growth. In fact, Portland thought more people would be using public transportation when they decided to do all this many decades ago. And they failed to realize a lot of people still drive their cars, still want to drive their cars. There is discussion that we might have toll roads in Portland. Can you believe that? Little old Portland having toll roads. When I go down to Florida and visit family down there, like they're everywhere. Toll roads are like the thing. But they have the thing about Florida that I have to give them credit for is like every time I'm down there, the freeways get wider and wider. I swear they have them like 6 lanes wide now, and they're glorious. There's like room for everybody, right? And they have to. My God, they've got the population growth happening that you have to consider when you're, Florida. There's a lot. Actually, traffic in Florida can be a real nightmare. When I was down there about a year ago. Was it a year? It was about a year ago. I was going from just outside of Tampa through Orlando, and I was going up towards like Georgia area. And the traffic was insane. And we pulled over to go to the bathroom and get snacks and whatever. And there was a line in the bathroom, this big convenience store, gas stop that, probably people use when they get off the freeway. And I was waiting in line. I was talking to this lady. I'm like, is this normal to be waiting in line in a convenience store for a bathroom and like this traffic? She's like, oh, honey. She's like, I tried to get to my sister's wedding about 6 months ago, and she goes, "You need to add an extra hour more to your commute if you're gonna go anywhere it says to go on Google Maps." She's like, "It is just the traffic is insane." She goes, "We've had a 500,000 people yearly move to my area." And I thought, it's a lot of people down there. So luckily, they have the space in the land still for their freeways and transportation systems. But going back to Portland, I don't want to digress too much, is we did not plan that more people wouldn't be using the public transportation. We really don't have amazing public transportation here, in my opinion. We have the bus system and we have the Max. And the Max only goes to a few areas, that I think somewhere down the road they're going to, connect it more throughout the city. And that was their intention, but it's just not efficient enough for most people. And commuting is now kind of all over. Most people who live on the west side or the east side, they kind of stay in their area. And so it's not really planned out well enough for most people to use the public transportation. So yeah, we could do better at that. I don't even know what they'll do for the traffic in the future. I think the toll roads is their last ditch effort to sort of, figure out what the heck they're going to do about managing traffic, because they think that most people aren't going to pay the tolls and they'll be forced to get on public transportation or rideshare. I just think that that's going to cause, I don't think, I guess it's wait and see what happens. I think it's got shot down recently that the whole toll road thing is on pause, is my understanding, but it's on the table. It's been on the table for a few years now. And yeah, we have a traffic problem here in Portland. So what I usually recommend to people if they're moving to Portland is decide where you want to live based on commute. So if you work from home and you have flexibility, cool. What's your lifestyle? What do you like to do? Where do you want to be? Do you want a walkable community? Is east side your vibe, or is west side more your flavor? Find out where it is you want to live. If you have a commute, in fact, we're going to be doing a couple of videos coming up on traffic and commute times, because we feel it's really important for people who are considering moving to Portland to understand what they're getting into depending on where they're living. So we're going to talk about both the west side and the east side in two different videos. So stay tuned on that. Make sure you click subscribe and tap that notification bell if you want to hear about all of our videos coming up on Portland life, especially regarding the one I just talked about. We're trying to do thoughtful videos on things that if you're moving to Portland, what is something you want to know about Portland? And if you do have that, put it in the comments, the chat, let us know. We'll do a video on it. We would love to hear from you specifically on things that, or maybe you live in Portland and you're like, hey, nobody's done a video on this and it really needs to be addressed. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts on are that. So give us some feedback. We want to do videos that make sense for our community as well as people moving here, so they can see and hear and know what to expect as they make a potential move. Other thing I thought about Portland, and I like this about Portland, is that we're pretty friendly and accepting. I mean, maybe to an extreme, but one thing I always hear from people who move to Portland is they're like, wow, people are really friendly. They talk about how when they're in traffic, people let them in. They don't have to fight for, a space. People are like, come on, get in. If they're at a stoplight, people are like, oh, go ahead. I mean, I found myself doing that the other day. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. It's like we're super friendly in the traffic realm mostly. And we're just like happy, chipper people for the most part. But I hear that a lot from people that move here from the East Coast. And then I had a client who moved here from New Mexico who was like, I have lived in 4 different areas, major cities in the country, and I cannot believe how nice Portlanders are. Why do we think that is? Do you think Portlanders are nice? Tell me what you think in the chat. I'm curious. I think we're pretty friendly. Of course, I've lived here my whole life. I don't know any different. But yeah, I think we're pretty friendly. Obviously, we're accepting. I mean, doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that Portland is, we take all types, we accept people. That's why, actually, I have an interesting thing to bring up. I actually am on TikTok as well. So if you want to follow me there, somebody made the comment, because I do get a lot of people coming from out of state, like Texas and some of the red states. And they had asked, do people move here because they feel like they're not safe in other states based on all the politics? And of course, people move all the time for politics, especially since COVID. But yeah, people do move here a lot. I've had a couple of people who move here specifically from Texas who felt like they were more accepted for, their beliefs or how they wanted to live their lives. And Portland is very much come as you are, be who you are. And so, yeah, I do think that is kind of nice. We're diverse in that way. Some people think we're not diverse enough, but if you look at some of the other parts of the country, we're pretty diverse. We're pretty accepting. Um, I like living in an area where people are accepting of other people. I like variety. I like diversity. I think that we could always have more depending on, I mean, we have a lot going for us, but you could always be doing better, right? But some people think we're on the far spectrum of that, and maybe you could argue we are, right? I mean, obviously, when it comes to hot topics like homelessness and all that, people think we're overly accepting and contributing to all the problems. But in general, the people that you meet here, doing your thing, living your life, pretty friendly. I would say. I mean, I know people who are from the East Coast. I have family in Boston, and East Coast people are considered not friendly when compared to Pacific Northwest people. Trust me on that. I actually like East Coast people. I like directness. I like people giving direct feedback, even if they're yelling at you. I mean, don't yell at me, but I can get down with the East Coast vibe pretty easily. But yeah, it's completely different out here. And I think we're friendly, we're nice. Um, so yeah, tell me your thoughts on that. I'd be curious what you think about that comment. And the other thing I like about Portland is, we have a good food scene. When I go down to visit family in Florida, it is franchise after franchise after franchise. And I can't be I'm not a franchise girl. I don't like going to all the franchises of food. It's great if you're into all that, but I like mom and pops. I like custom, chef, homemade. Portland definitely has that, especially on the east side. I mean, there's some on the west side, but east side wins. Pop wins the vote. Um, and maybe it's because I'm not a real big, like, I don't eat out a lot. I like to cook my food from home. I like to cook from scratch if I have time. So when I choose to pay to go out to eat, I like to go to a place that is kind of known for their specialty cooking. Maybe chef has made the food. Maybe it's from scratch. Maybe it's food from the local region. That's the thing I really appreciate about the Portland metro area is, like, we do appreciate and value, like, when you go to, like, for example, I'm a skier. I like to go up to Mount Hood. When I go decide, if I don't bring my own lunch, I'll go into the Alpenstube. I think I said that right. That's one of the restaurants up at Mount Hood. The thing I love about it is, like, everything is, like, local. They'll have, like, local food, vegetables, whatever they're making on the menu. And that's at Mount Hood. They could feed you grub and you'd be happy, right? But here we are at Mount Hood and they're like, "Oh, we have, a vegan option. We have gluten-free. We've got, you know, here's all the vegetables and we're making a cool whatever," and it's like, you just find little things like that around Portland where, they could totally get away with, like, chicken strips and french fries and everyone's happy, right? They're skiing, they don't care. They want a beer and grub. But there I am up on the mountain. I'm like, "Oh, I can get some quality food. I can get healthy options," and I just love that. And then they have, like, local beers on the menu and they have, all their stuff is local. And I like that. I feel like I'm eating something that is made in the area and it's like they're helping local farmers or business owners out. And then the food just tastes better to me overall. So that's the thing about Portland. It's really nice. You don't get that in a lot of other states. You can't just go to, like, other states and they have, like, locally, all the foods, like, local where somebody's, like, cooking it. Um, it's like you go to some of the restaurants around town and they're trying to stay, even the Burgerville. If you want to take a fast food restaurant and kind of make it local, like, one thing I appreciate about Burgerville, can't find Burgervilles everywhere, but, like, when it's, strawberry season or blueberry or whatever the seasonality is, their milkshakes are fantastic. Not that I eat those a lot, but I'm just saying, like, even the fast food restaurant Burgerville partakes in the local seasonality and local fruits, so that's kinda nice. But I digress a little bit because I don't wanna say that our fast food restaurants are superior, but Burgerville's kinda nice because they do kinda follow that idea of it. Um, but I do think that that makes such a huge difference in the way that, we operate. We don't have a lot of franchises in Portland. You can find them, they're here, but they don't do as well. But people, like, when I think about going out to eat, and I think a lot of my colleagues and my friends are very much like this, where it's like, you kind of want to pick a place where the food is good and it's not like you're going to Applebee's. You're kind of thinking about those restaurants that are more locally owned. Even if it has more than one location, it's locally owned. You know that the ingredients and the food that they bring to the table is, just a little bit more local and fresher and not, out of a can, a box, or shipped in from some warehouse from the franchise capital. So, and that's something a lot of my family that comes from Florida, they love that about Portland. They love when they come here, they feel healthier. They actually say that we feel healthier being here. We feel like we have more options to eat. They like our grocery stores even more. Like, yes, Whole Foods, New Seasons, wicked expensive. They do have Whole Foods in their areas, but it's not as prominent, right? Like they might have one and they have to drive another 20 miles to get to another one. Whereas here we have a lot more options. We have Market Choice, we have the New Seasons. We just kind of have a little bit more natural grocers. That's it. There's a few of those around town, but they just talk a lot about how they have more big box grocery store types, and I kind of love that because I feel like when my Florida family comes and visits, they always showcase, like they put a spotlight on the things that I love about living in Portland. Because when you go down there, it's just a whole different world completely, in my opinion. Um, yeah, we have crappy weather sometimes, a lot of times. Um, but man, you can't beat our summers. And the spring, at least in 2024, has been fantastic. We've had some 70-degree weather days mixed in with some rain days. I can handle that. No problem. It's just hard when it rains for months on end and we don't have spring start at all. It just rains right through till like June. But last year we started early with our summer and I felt like we had 6 good months. So I always tell people, during the holidays, it's not so bad to have really cold weather. Like it gets dark and cold here like November, December, but it's also the holidays, so you're a little more distracted. You kind of want it to be cold. The hardest months in my opinion and from others I've talked to, it's like January through probably March, April. And then we sort of come out of this darkness and we start seeing the mornings getting lighter and the evenings getting lighter and the weather's getting more temperate and you get mixed days of rain and sun. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, we're almost and then you have a good day of like 70-degree weather around here. And then you're like, oh my God, this is the best place on earth. You forget all about the winter. You forget how cold, dark, and rainy it was. And like one good day here in Portland can like make up for a whole month of rain. Swear to God, it is the funniest thing. Like people act like Portland's the best place on earth, but they were just bitching a week ago, right? But anyway, yeah. So those are the things that were on my mind when I was thinking this afternoon after I was watching the news about like some of the people in the Midwest who are dealing with like tornadoes and stuff. And I thought, we just don't have to worry about all that. We have a lot going for us here in the Portland area, a lot. And I because I'm in the business I'm at, I see a lot of people move away for whatever reason, and then they come back and they always say it feels like home. I had a couple move down to Las Vegas about a year ago, and now they're kind of kicking themselves. They're like, "Oh, we miss Portland. Like we can handle the gray." I was like, so a lot of people do make the venture out and then come right back because, it still is a great place. Every place has its pros and cons, but it's just what matters most. So anywho, I thought I would get on tonight and just talk about those things. I hit like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 things that were just on my mind. I wanted to share them. If you're on watching, I'd love to hear from you. Does any of this ring to you? Do you have any feedback, comments? Do you want me to talk about anything else that was of interest to you that I said? Or maybe you're like, hey, I want somebody to cover a certain topic that, about Portland. So if that's you, let me know in the comments. I am going to take them seriously if you do put them down there and probably would do a video. But we are going to be doing a couple of videos coming up in the next week. Well, actually, we're going to be doing videos this week on 2 topics. I mentioned them earlier, which is the traffic commute. Those won't probably come out for a couple weeks. We have one video dropping tonight, and another one later this week on Saturday. So stay tuned. They're really good. But if you guys want us to cover any particular topics, we'd love to do it. So let us know. And thanks for watching the live stream and have a wonderful evening.